Tonight on Primetime Politics, recognizing the Palestinian state.
We need to make sure that we recognize the Palestinian state at the right time.
The Foreign Affairs Minister throws cold water on an NDP proposal, but if Canada supports a two-state solution, why not move forward with recognition now? We'll speak to Canada's ambassador to the United Nations about the policy. Also, bumping up old age security. The Bloc Québécois wants a 10% top-up for every Canadian over the age of 64, and they're making it a condition of supporting the minority Liberals. We'll speak to Bloc MP Christine Normandin about their proposal. And
this is going to be a fist fight. It's going to be dirty with the NDP.
Affordability, homelessness, and safe drug supply. We'll check in with the BC campaign as it kicks off and examine the issues that might also affect the next federal vote. This is Primetime Politics. Hello, everyone. I'm Michael Serapio. The ongoing war in Gaza was top of mind in Ottawa today as the NDP, in a letter, called on the Liberal government to do three things: recognize the state of Palestine, impose sanctions on Israeli leaders, those responsible for military action in Gaza, and impose an arms embargo on Israel. The NDP Foreign Affairs critic making those demands as reports say another 10 Palestinians were killed in Gaza today, including 4 children. Take a listen now to Heather McPherson, followed by the response we heard from the Foreign Minister.
If we go to an election within weeks or months, and if there is a Conservative government, this will not happen. There is an urgency here that is vital, that requires that the Liberal government take the steps necessary to recognize the state of Palestine.
So we, as Canada, have decided that there's no possibility of a negotiated outcome. So we reserve the right to make sure that we can recognize the Palestinian state at the right time.
Now, the question of Palestinian statehood comes as leaders gather in New York for the United Nations General Assembly, and as officials from around the world express fears of a growing conflict in the Middle East, with Israel widening its air campaign in Lebanon, the country to its north, targeting Hezbollah positions. Well, joining us now is Canada's ambassador to the United Nations, Bob Ray. Ambassador, thank you for making the time.
Thank you, Michael. Good to be with you.
Listen, we just played back for people at home what we heard from Heather McPherson today, calling for the recognition of a Palestinian state. We also heard from the Foreign Affairs Minister saying when the time is right. But here you have Canada, and as a country, it says it advocates a two-state solution. So wouldn't acknowledging a Palestinian state now emphasize the belief in that goal and perhaps put moral pressure on all parties involved to essentially end the fighting in Gaza?
Well, first of all, I fully agree that we need to find the path to the two-state solution. It's not a new path for Canada. We've been on that path since 1947, and it's important to stress that this has been a position that has been adopted by Canadian governments for decades, and that it was initially completely resisted and rejected by many Arab countries and by the Palestinians. Eventually, we got to Oslo, which took us to the point of saying, let's work towards mutual recognition and get to a better place. Canada's had diplomatic relationship with the Palestinian Authority since that time. We've had full representation in Ramallah. We have a team of people who work in conjunction with the Palestinian Authority. But we do have some challenges ahead that we have to look at and deal with in getting to a state of formal diplomatic recognition of a state when there are requirements for that state in order to be a state. We do believe firmly that we need to have the ability to indicate publicly in every way we can that the creation of a Palestinian state, we believe, is not only in the interests of the Palestinian people, it's also in the interests of the people of Israel and of the state of Israel. But we have some things happening, such as the Hamas-Fatah agreement, which was brokered by China. We don't know what that means. We don't know what effect that has on the governance of the Palestinian Authority. We don't know what it means in terms of where that state intends to go. So I think it's important for us to, many other countries take a similar position. Many other countries have still not taken the step of recognizing. Many of those are countries that we fundamentally agree with. We're not into gesture politics. We're really into doing what is the right thing and how do we make the progress that we need to make. I think our Middle Eastern policy has shown flexibility as we've responded to the situation. We've been clearly calling for the ceasefire, clearly calling for the liberation, the freedom of the hostages. Very much regret some of the positions that have been taken that are preventing that from happening. And that's the route that we're going to continue to take.
Mm-hmm. Well, you talk about actions that might be preventing that from happening. We are also now seeing hostilities between Hezbollah in Lebanon and with the Israeli government. Are you concerned of a full, wider scale conflict here?
I think anybody who thinks about it would be concerned about an escalation. One day, one thing happens, the next day, something else, the next day, the other side goes back. You have to make sure that people don't actually think that a purely military solution is going to be at the core of what will resolve the conflict there. Hezbollah, like Hamas, has not recognized the right of Israel to be a state. Iran has not recognized the right of Israel to be a state. Hamas carried out a brutal, bloody attack on innocent civilians in Israel on October 7th. We're coming up to the first year anniversary of that terrible, horrific event. And we need to understand the depth of rejection that exists. And we also need to understand that rejectionism has to stop and that we have to find practical solutions that involve the recognition of two states. And that is something that we're continuing to work on and work with many other countries as we strive to get to this approach. Canada is deeply involved in all of the discussions that are taking place at the UN and elsewhere as to how do we get out of this terrible conflict. And we will continue to be deeply involved in that.
Well, as you say that, I wonder just how much confidence do you have that the Netanyahu government is listening to concerns of countries like Canada right now?
Well, I mean, the fact of the matter is the Israeli cabinet and the Israeli government have stated publicly that they're not interested in a two-state solution, and I think that's wrong. I think it's counterproductive for Israel to take that position because I believe very strongly that a Palestinian state is in Israel's own security interests, because I don't believe it's tenable to think that you can have a political solution in the Middle East which does not involve recognizing the rights of Palestinians to self-determination and the rights of Palestinians to live in peace with the state of Israel. Both sides need to have the security to get there. Any sensible person would understand that we're far away from that at the moment. But I've also seen, all of us have seen situations in the world where eventually some kind of common sense prevails. And we are working very hard to make sure that happens. But I wouldn't pretend for a moment that we're at an easy moment at this present time.
Mm-hmm. You know, before you go, I also want to touch on the matter of Haiti, because I was listening to your news conference earlier today, and you were making note of the fact that, you know, if the UN Security Council would actually support a full UN peacekeeping mission, then Canada supports that. Does that mean then that Canada would commit troops if the United Nations if the Security Council voted in favor of a mission?
Well, I think this is one of the things you have to, what I said in my press conference today was, I said that, and then I immediately said, but in the next 2 weeks, that's not going to happen because Russia and China have indicated their opposition to an official peacekeeping mission of the UN. They're not interested in supporting such a thing. So we have to deal with the world of reality, which is why Canada has taken the view that we have to do everything we can to support Haiti in its leadership of its own security, and we have to do whatever we can to bolster that security. And that's why we've worked hard with Kenya, with Jamaica, with Belize, Guatemala, with El Salvador, with a number of countries in the region that are coming together. We believe strongly that we needed to build a strong basis of support for security in the neighborhood, and we needed to draw heavily on partners in the neighborhood in working with us to find solutions. And I think that's the approach that we've been taking, and I think it's led to an improvement in Haiti's security situation. But it is not. We got ways to go. So we need to keep working in a positive direction.
But it seems, though, that it's the Security Council that stops a full mission from happening. Would Canada be speaking in favor of a full mission, though?
Well, I mean, we think that the mission that's in place needs continuing support, and frankly, we're supplying that support financially, in terms of coordination, in terms of equipment, in terms of support on the ground for what's being done, in terms of training, the Haitian National Police. We've been working very, very hard over the last several years to in this area. That's exactly what we've been doing, and I think, we have taken the position that that's the approach that we need to take to get us into to get Haiti into a stronger position, to have an election, to have a future there that they can build with the full support of the UN. But Canada will always be working hard with all the actors in the neighborhood to make sure that we're putting the security situation in a better place than it's been for some considerable time.
Ambassador Ray, always appreciate when you make time for us. Thank you for this.
Thank you. Good to talk to you.
Well, back to Ottawa now, where the Trudeau Liberals are facing a confidence vote this week, their first since the end of the supply and confidence agreement with the NDP. The Bloc Québécois says it will vote to keep the government in power in order to get a bump up in old age security. Under Bill C-319, the Bloc is asking for a 10% increase in the OAS, applying to everyone over the age of 64. Now, no word yet if the government will agree to the bill, for now pointing out it already implemented a similar increase for those 75 and older.
We've done, a larger top-up to address those who are the most vulnerable in our society. That was the philosophy we adopted to make sure we can help the seniors which are most in need, and that's well understood by seniors and Canadians.
Well, with more, we're now joined by Christine Normandin, the Bloc Québécois MP for the riding of Saint-Jean. Madame Normandin, thank you for joining us.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So let's talk about C-319 here, because what you're proposing would increase the old age security payment, but it would be given under what you're proposing to everyone age 65 and older. And the clawbacks only really apply to individuals making over $142,000 a year. So I'm wondering, are you asking the government to give money to individuals who don't actually need the top-up?
Well, actually, we're asking the government to put an end to discrimination between different age groups. Basically, what we're asking is that the raise that was given to people age 75 and plus be the same that will be given to 65 to 74. And in the end, if you receive more, but you already make a lot of money, it comes back in taxes when you fill your tax report. So it's a measure that we want to see applied to all elderly 75 and plus, and without a discrimination between age. So it's not really, it's something that's already been done for those age 75 and plus. We just want to put an end to the discrimination between both age classes, as when you're poor, there's no discrimination with regards to age, and you need that support as well. So that's the way we see it.
Are you worried, though, that using more money for OAS would take it away from other programs that need greater priority, though?
Well, actually, there's plenty of places where we could get the money from, and we've been asked, well, how much will they cost? And it has been analyzed by the public budget officer. The cost would be $16 billion over 5 years, so basically around $3 billion a year. And when you think about it, just since 2022, in tax credits, fiscal gifts. What was given to the oil industry is $83 billion. So we could just use a bit of that money and take it out of the pocket of big oil and put it in the pocket of the elderly and those who need it the most. So it's all about a question of choices. And we think that's one of the choices the government could make and that we would support for sure. And also intrusions in fields of jurisdiction of Quebec and provinces, most of the time could cost more because you double the bureaucracy. So if the government didn't make the choice to intrude in those jurisdictions, there could be money saved there as well. There's plenty of places where the money could be, we could target not cuts, but reallocation and use that for a raise in OAS.
I hear what you're saying, but for example, when it comes to the money given to oil companies, the government will make the argument that the money is actually being used not so much as a free-for-all for oil companies, but a way of encouraging a transition to a cleaner way and diversifying what they do. So it's actually an environmental program. So I hear what you're saying, but there are options that can be used here. But in terms of prioritizing the needs of seniors who may not necessarily need the money, are you taking it away from other sectors that actually need it more? For example, young people who are more concerned about housing.
Well, that's not a place where we'd like to see cuts. But if we come back to what you mentioned about oil and clean transition, we are all about clean and green transition. But what we've seen so far is that that money is used in order to make so-called green oil a thing that we believe can't exist, and gives a leverage to companies then to produce more oil instead of slowly getting out of oil production. So if it's used that way, it might be a little bit greener, but with the big picture, it is not, as more oil is produced in the end. So that it's really a question of choices. And when the minister was talking about efficient subsidies, that's also a thing that we don't believe really exists. If we want to make a real green transition, there's plenty of startups in Quebec who could have better ideas how to use the money than big oil companies.
Now, last week, your leader said that he believes the government is thinking seriously about supporting the bill to increase OAS or to expand OAS. Have you heard anything more since your leader had his news conference last week?
Not on my part, so I don't know how the discussions are going, but in the end, I think it's a very fair proposal that we're making to the government, and I do believe that the channels of discussion are open, and we don't tend to have open strategies and open discussions in public. We have put on the table what our priorities are, but when it comes to negotiation, we still give us a bit of room for more discreet conversation.
Fair enough. But I do wonder if the government doesn't support the bill, what message do you think the government will be sending to the Bloc and also its aspirations to keep Parliament going?
Well, I think it doesn't send a good message to both the Bloc and the elderly. That's why I do hope that the conversations will be fruitful, because it's a lot of people that you just push back, and we mentioned that this week. If you don't want to give the 65 to 74 a raise in OAS, go tell it to their face instead of saying, well, we've already put money into dental care and it affects them. No, just don't tell them we don't want to raise OAS and see how they react, and you might eventually pay the political price that goes with it. So I think the recommendation that we made is fair. It was voted also in the House on second reading. Bill C-319 was agreed by a majority of parties in the House. So it's something that looks like it makes common sense to people. So I think it is just fair that they go along and have a good hearing about our proposition.
Christine Normandin, I really appreciate the time this evening. Thank you for that.
A pleasure.
To British Columbia now, where the campaign to decide the province's next government is now officially underway, with the BC NDP leader David Eby reacting this Monday to a video from the summer featuring his Conservative opponent. In it, John Rustad says he regrets getting the COVID vaccine and describes the public health program as a campaign to control public opinion.
When I talked to Bonnie Henry about it, I started to realize that it wasn't so much about trying to get herd immunity or trying to stop the spread, but it was more around shaping opinion and control on the population.
Well, to talk to us about the BC campaign, we're now joined by Mo Amir, host of This is VANCOLOUR. Mo, thank you for joining us.
Oh, it's my pleasure. You know, I actually thought that this was the serious politics outlet, so I'm a little surprised that you asked me to be here, but honored nonetheless.
No, you're serious. You're serious. You're in good company here. Listen, let's talk about this campaign, because, a few months ago, people were talking about, or at least predicting what would be an easy re-election for David Eby and the NDP, but that's not the talk right now, thanks in large part to BC United and the leader's decision to suspend that party's campaign. So was Eby just benefiting from a vote split this spring, or was there discontent that the numbers weren't showing?
I can understand that from the outside it looked like there was a vote split, but I don't think that that's necessarily accurate. It was more like a small snake slowly but eventually swallowing a much larger, slower, defenseless snake. What was happening was that the BC Conservatives were this dormant party that were suddenly revived with a new organization and a new leader in John Rustad, and they were, over time, but relatively quickly, taking away the free enterprise coalition voter base. And not only the voter base, they were taking away MLAs, they were taking away organizers. And so what was left of BC United, they were basically down to single digits in the polls. And I think if they had continued and not suspended their campaign, I think it would have been even worse. And at that point, I don't think there would have been much of a vote split. Some of the remaining BC United supporters have already talked about supporting the BC NDP, or perhaps not even voting at all. In terms of Premier Eby kind of enjoying a vote split, I think obviously in the polls you had seen a bit of that as this shift was happening. But at the same time, Premier Eby has still maintained a high level of popularity. He has high favorability numbers. The BC NDP's popularity in general has been hovering around 40%. There's maybe some changes here and there, but ultimately it's not like we've seen a collapse of his support.
Not seeing a collapse. In fact, and we know that because there is reference already to the fact that this is going to be a very tight campaign right to the very end. But, it was interesting to see John Rustad, the leader of the Conservatives, open the campaign this weekend at Crab Park in Vancouver. That's near a homelessness encampment for people who don't know. So makes me wonder, how big of an issue will homelessness be in this campaign, and what Rustad seemed to be tying it to safe injection sites and illegal drug supply?
Yeah, great question, and really an interesting choice for Mr. Rustad to officially launch his campaign when we think about Crab Park. I thought that he was going to announce some sort of homelessness strategy, because the reality is that while Mr. Rustad points to homelessness as a large issue, he hasn't really outlined what he wants to do. In fact, his party has been against a lot of supportive housing projects, which include wraparound services, which include things like avenues to treatment. So it's not really clear exactly what he wants to do with the homelessness crisis. Now, with regard to Mr. Rustad tying homelessness with safe injection sites or safe consumption sites, this is kind of what we're seeing throughout the country nationally, referring to these sites like Insight, like safe consumption sites, like safe inhalation sites as drug dens. And you're probably more aware that that's what federal Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre has been calling them. But I think the reality is that British Columbia, and Vancouver in particular, has a long history of these type of sites. I do think that British Columbians recognize that these sites help stop the spread of disease, certainly things like hepatitis C and HIV. They stop other health complications that can be had when you're using dirty supplies. And then when we think about the toxic drugs crisis, it's not necessarily safe supply that's killing people. It is the toxic drug supply. And so I think that British Columbians, on one hand, do recognize that. But on the other hand, we have seen homelessness grow throughout the province, not just in Vancouver, Victoria, and Kelowna, but in other regions that maybe didn't have these issues. And I think that there is a segment of the population that is very fatigued with this issue. They don't see much progress, and certainly the numbers show that when you look at the homelessness count that has gone up provincially. And so I do think that there is a segment of the population that really just wants to have it out of sight and out of mind, and they're not really that concerned about what the solutions end up being.
Okay, well,
so you have...
Go ahead, Mo.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, so you have a provincial BC Conservative Party that is effectively tapping into that fatigue and that frustration.
Fatigue, frustration, and from the NDP side, we've also seen something interesting because a number of their people are talking about certain individuals who are running for the Conservatives, describing them as anti-abortion, anti-science, homophobic, weird, bigoted. Can those descriptions sway voters?
Well, as I wrote in the Tyee recently, John Rustad is a climate change denier. He will say that climate change is real, but what he's referring to are the long-term patterns of climate change. He has openly said that human activity is not the primary driver of climate change, which is the scientific consensus. And so I think they have a lot on John Rustad and the Conservatives, because they have a lot of candidates that have said some interesting, weird, perhaps offensive things, and they're certainly drawing on that. Even, in fact, today there was a video that the BC NDP released of Mr. Rustad, calling the COVID-19 vaccines the so-called vaccine and making some sort of reference to it being something to use to control the population. And I guess in the end, this is really going to be a test for British Columbians in terms of how much of these, let's just call them fringe or just out of the mainstream ideas, will they be able to tolerate? Or will British Columbians effectively accept imperfect authenticity? Because that's what the BC Conservatives are saying. They're saying, yeah, you know what, we have some candidates and perhaps even our leader that didn't really have big ambitions to become a politician. But this is real life. People say things, people have kooky beliefs, but we want to get together and we want to bring you solutions. And so this is what that test is going to be. But certainly in terms of its effectiveness, I think that John Rustad has a big gap with women, and that's showing out in the polls. Women that may be worried about losing access to free contraception, or may worry that their reproductive rights are at risk, and that's certainly something that the BC NDP are hammering on.
Well, we are watching from here in Ottawa, Mo. You and I hopefully will get a chance to speak again, but for this evening, thank you for that.
Thank you so much.
And that is Primetime Politics for this Monday. I'm Michael Serapio. For everyone here at CPAC, thank you for watching. Primetime Politics is back tomorrow night. Until then, take care.